You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today. But before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatoby for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is presented by the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw people have a rich history and a bright future. At the Choctaw Cultural Center, you can take part in a story 14,000 years in the making. Stroll through our immersive exhibits portraying Choctaw life from the moment our ancestors emerged from the Nani Weha in Mississippian homelands to the Trail of Tears, where we lost so many loved ones, and finally to the modern-day tribe making a positive impact on local communities throughout southeastern Oklahoma. Try your hand at our social dancing and stickball and learn more about our vibrant culture through demonstrations, workshops, and classes. The kids will have a blast in our Luxie Activity Center. The Choctaw Cultural Center is more than a museum. It's a living, breathing experience. Visit choctawculturalcenter.com to plan your visit. And let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, host, back with another episode. Gives me great pleasure to welcome Chief Wade Gorley to the podcast, Chief of Police for Oklahoma City.
Yes, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pretty big city, right? When people think of, they don't think of downtown as very big, but the borderline of Oklahoma City is far and wide. Yeah,
about a little over 621 square miles, one of the largest land area cities in the country.
Yeah. So being a police officer, I'm from the UK originally, right? So police officers in the UK are very different to police officers here. It's just totally different setup, whereas, even just the things you do, the things you can do. My younger brother is a police officer back home, so it's fun to chat with him about certain things. And I was talking to him about who I was interviewing today, and he had a bunch of questions, which I'm sure we can get to later. But it is interesting to see both sides of it.
Yeah, very interesting.
So, obviously, Chief of Police since 19, was it?
July of 2019.
Okay. So in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen a lot of things and dealt with COVID and all the other stuff. And
yeah, a lot of things that, as police chiefs all around the country, we've never dealt with before. It's interesting too. Oklahoma City is part of what they call the Major City Chiefs Association. It's I believe it's 77 largest agencies in the United States and Canada. And just since 2019, it's very interesting. There's been I want to say around a 75% turnover in chiefs around the country. It's a difficult job. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, with everything, and obviously technology, social media, it's not the job that it was 10 years ago.
No, and we talk about that all the time. How accessible you have to be, how much you have to be out in the community, and talking to people that were chiefs many years ago, and talking to them about what I do now and how my day is. It was nothing like that then. It's always been a tough job, but you're right with the technology the way it is, and just things going on around the country. If something can happen 1,000 miles from here and it still have an impact on us, even though we weren't involved in it, because news and everything else is just accessible right now.
Right. Yeah. Everyone's got a camera. You got dash cams. You got personal body cameras. And then it all helps with evidence. It goes both ways, though, right?
Absolutely.
Everybody's everyone's, you're going to be on video at some point, right? And now, sadly, that's the thing. When someone gets pulled over, the first thing to think of is, I'm going to get my phone out, video this just in case something bad happens.
Right.
Which is sad, though you have to deal with that, and you have to deal with that stigma and overshadow that stigma too, right? You have to kind of overcome that from being someone who effectively is, serving the community.
Absolutely. And of course, I watch a lot of videos of our officers doing their jobs, and I'm truly amazed at the patience they have now that, a lot of us, when I first started this job, we didn't probably have the patience for that back then, but, they know everything they do is under a microscope, and they work really hard to not escalate things, and it's pretty amazing to watch, especially when you're looking at a 21, 22-year-old person who maybe is just out of college, just out of the academy, just out of training. It's amazing to me the maturity that they show. And of course, we're human, we make mistakes too, but I'm more often amazed at the great things they do than I am the bad things that happen.
Yeah, because like you said, everyone makes mistakes. We're human beings. But it's harder to develop that patience skill, right, over just saying one wrong phrase or just, acting out of emotion. And
absolutely,
so it's definitely harder to develop to do that. So the police thing then, taking it back to you growing up, do you have kind of family in law enforcement? What leads you into the idea that I'm going to be, a public servant and go and be in law enforcement from a young age?
So it's kind of interesting. When I was a kid, I never really thought about it. I had a cousin that was a police officer. He started out in Houston, and then he was a police officer in New Mexico too, where most of my family. I was born out in West Texas, and so I had family. My mother's family was from a little town called Denver City. My dad's family was from a town called Hobbs, which is in New Mexico.
Yeah, I know Hobbs is,
So I had a cousin that was a police officer there, and I remember him, coming over to my grandmother's house when we'd be out there visiting in uniform. I thought it was cool, but I never really thought I would want to do that. My dad was also a police officer for a little while when he was finishing up college, but that was before I was born. I don't remember that at all. So there really wasn't much in my family as far as that goes. My family, they're all in the oil business, and that's kind of what we grew up around. Kind of what I thought I might end up doing, if not that, some type of business, because that's kind of where our background was. So. It's kind of interesting. And then what actually turned me to law enforcement was after I graduated high school, I went to OU, Oklahoma University. And when I was a freshman there, my first semester didn't go very well. Away from home, I spent a little bit too much time, hanging out at parties and with friends than I did going to class. And I remember coming home after that first semester, my grades weren't that great. And I remember my mom and dad saying, you better find something that you're passionate about, and you better get this together and make good grades, or, we're not going to continue to pay for you to be in college. And I took a elective course that next semester in political science that was taught by a retired police officer. He'd been a police officer in Berkeley. I think he said he was a police officer in the 60s. And so anyway, I took that class, was listening to his stories. I thought, this is pretty cool. And I ended up taking all of the classes that he offered and getting my political science degree with emphasis on law enforcement administration. And that kind of had me hooked.
Yeah. Why OU?
Really the biggest thing is just as a kid, I'm a huge OU football fan. Remember watching OU Nebraska games and just was always fascinated by the campus. Thought it was, just a great place. And at the time, too, they had a real good business school that I thought, would be good. Of course, it turned out, too, they had a real robust political science department with the law enforcement emphasis, too, which actually worked out better for me. But that was just kind of always my plan. I always wanted to go to OU, even as a kid.
Yeah. And did you play kind of sports growing up? Any intramural stuff at OU as well?
I did. I played a little intramural football. We had a team that we did a couple of years. One year when I was in the dorms, and then another year just a group of us got together, did that. I played a little bit of football growing up, and a little bit of everything, and was never that great at any of it, but just that you'd like to do and play, have camaraderie and hang out with your friends, and growing up in a small town, that was just kind of, it was a good way to have something to do after school and be involved in.
Yeah. What do you think about the SEC move?
I get from the standpoint of why they're doing it. I'm a little disappointed that, there won't be that Bedlam rivalry anymore, but I felt the same way when Nebraska left the Big 12, because that OU-Nebraska rivalry was always huge too. I think from a standpoint of what it could do for the football team and the university, I mean, again, I get why they're doing it, and I think in the long run it'll be good.
Yeah, I think so too. You're right.
Yeah.
It's tough to get through those first couple of years, right? They're always the hardest, and then
absolutely
dealing with the naysayers, and I think we'll miss OU OSU games. Obviously, you're still going to have OU Texas, right, which is kind of nice. But it's maybe just the OU OSU game will probably be a preseason game now rather than a conference championship or what do you call it, Thanksgiving game.
Yeah.
But it's exciting for the state, I think.
I think so. Yeah, and I have season tickets every year. We go to the games. We go to OU Texas, but I think it's just that part of that. We lost OU Nebraska. Yeah. Now we're going to lose OU OSU, and like you said, we still got OU Texas as a big rivalry.
Right, and maybe OSU will win some conference championships now that OU is left. If TCU doesn't continue to rise like they did last year. That's. It's all good. It's all fine. So while you're at OU then, and you kind of see this, this opportunity to go political science and you diving down the law enforcement route, do you have any opportunities, any kind of three-letter agency type people that come in to recruit, FBI, stuff like that? Because that's kind of what they do, right? They come in and they, whatever it is, I've had guests on in the past that have said the same thing, and former Governor Frank Keating was the same way. He was in at OU, and that's how he got recruited to go FBI, I think it was. Was there any kind of similar experiences for yourself? Did anyone come into class and talk to you?
I do remember that happening, and then they would set up, it seems like I remember them, the federal agencies setting up like recruiting booths in the union, and I was interested in that. But the big thing is, I did an internship when I was a senior at OU, and I did that with the probation and parole, Oklahoma Probation and Parole. One of the probation officers that worked in that office had been a DEA agent before, and so I spent some time talking to her about that. And at that time, it was guaranteed if you were going to join the DEA or the FBI, you weren't going to be in Oklahoma. They were going to send you, New York or DC or DEA. They could send you out of the country too. So she talked to me a lot about that, and I wasn't interested in being that far away from home and away from Oklahoma, where I'd grown up. And so it just that killed that pretty quick.
Yeah. So just naturally a real homebody, and so didn't really want to be, stationed somewhere else, right? Which makes sense why they'd want to send you somewhere.
Or have to move a lot, and that's what she said, is that, you get somewhere and you spend a few years and they're going to move you again. And, if you start thinking about, at that age, I didn't have a family or anything, but you think at some point you do want that. And is that how you want to raise a family? And it just didn't appeal to me. I mean, there's a lot of guys I know that chose that route. We've had some of our officers that have left our department and done that's worked out very well for them, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah. So during that time then, do you once you graduate, do you just go straight into, law enforcement and into working? So how that next transition goes?
So what happened was when I graduated, and prior to that, actually at the end of my first semester, I knew I needed to start applying for jobs. Okay. And so, and I knew, for me, I knew Oklahoma City was the biggest agency in the state, and I wanted the ability to have those opportunities that a large police department could offer, that I wouldn't be stuck doing one thing. I would have opportunities to do other things, and of course see a lot, and just have the for me there was an excitement about policing, and I knew there'd be a variety of calls and things that I would have to deal with here in Oklahoma City. So in December, it was in December of 1988, I applied because I was going to graduate in May of '89. And so it was about probably March, April, somewhere around in there. I had completed everything up to going to a hiring board. I had done my polygraph, they had done my background, all of that, and then they called me and said, we have to stop everything. There's a hiring freeze, and we don't know when that's going to lift up. So it was getting closer to graduating. I really didn't. I felt like I'm about to have a college degree. I really don't want to, move back home and then have to move again. And so I had a friend at the time that I was working with that was one of the probation officers that I was assigned to. He was only a couple of years older than me. He wasn't out of school very long. And he had a really good friend that was a Chickasha police officer. And he said, hey, Chickasha's hiring if you want to go down, get your feet in the door and get some experience. So I went down there and applied and literally walked across the stage. I don't remember the exact date, but I walked across the stage in early May at OU, got my diploma, and I was at work at Chickasha the next night.
Yeah. That's thrown in the deep end, right?
It was.
Straight away. No time to enjoy, the week off.
And it's very interesting. Back then, in those smaller agencies like that, there was no training at all. So my first night there, they gave me a uniform, and I put the uniform on. They gave me a gun that I had never shot. I remember, it was a revolver, and they handed it to me and made sure I had bullets, and they put me with another officer and sent me out. I was working graveyard shift. Yeah. 3 nights later, I come in, with my officer that I was riding with, and the lieutenant who was the shift over the shift. We had sergeant that was the first line supervisor, and then the lieutenant was the shift commander. I walk in, and he looks at me, and he pokes me in the chest, and he goes, "Where's your vest?" I go, "What's a vest?" I didn't know what he was talking about. He was talking about a bulletproof vest. And he goes, "Good gosh," he said, "you've been working 3 nights without a vest." So he takes me back to a closet they had in the back and kind of mills around. He goes, "I think this will fit you." And it was too big, but I didn't care. Once I knew what it was,
exactly.
I was like, "Yeah, give me a vest." But I met a lot of great people down there, got a lot of great experiences. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I came off a shift one night in, I believe it was in August. No, it was in July. I get home, I'm about to go to bed, my phone rings, and it's the recruiter from the Oklahoma City Police Department. He said, "Hey, we just got this 3/4 cent sales tax about to pass, and our hiring freeze has been lifted, and everything you've done in your packet, you're worked up, ready to go. If you're still interested, can you be down here this morning?" So changed clothes, took a shower, drove straight up there, and I started the academy September 29th of 1989. Yeah. And what's really cool about that is our chief in Chickasha at the time was a retired Oklahoma City police captain, which is like a major now. Back then, and they were captains, but it was a division commander. So he had been a pretty high rank with the police department. And I remember telling my mom and dad, "Hey, I've got this job offer. I'm going to have to tell the chief," because he was about to send me to Cleat, because I got to be honest with him. I don't want him to send me to Cleat and then me leave and go to Oklahoma City knowing that. And I said, I was telling him, I may tell him this, and he said, "You don't have a job. I may have to move back home." They're like, "That's fine, because we know you'll start in September. That's all good." So I went in and I told him, and he was so appreciative of my honesty that he said, "You can stay here until you're ready to go. I won't send you to Cleat. I appreciate you telling me." He said, "I understand. I, worked in Oklahoma City, retired from there." Greatest guy's name was Bob Hicks. He was the chief at the time, and I'll never forget that conversation. And then, interestingly enough, a couple nights later, I'm on patrol with my officer that I'm riding with, and we find a guy deceased in a pickup. No evidence, nothing, but we knew it was a homicide, and the ME ruled it a homicide. And so Chief Hicks said, "I'm going to let you shadow a detective and see how a homicide works." So here I am, 22 years old. Yeah. Actually, I wasn't even 20. I was still 21 then. I said, "I'm 21 years old, just out of college, no law enforcement experience, and now I get to shadow a detective and work a homicide." And we solved it. Ended up, getting a guy put in prison over it. So I'll never forget that, and that opportunity that he gave me to still stay there and have a job.
Right. Yeah, that's what an experience, right?
Yeah.
It's like I said, it takes someone, just to have the kind of long view, right? The foresight to say, this will benefit you in the future. You need to go through this, and then it also kind of sparks interest, right? And makes you more committed to the job. And there's so many ways to look at it, but that's
absolutely,
that's a really special moment, and something obviously that kind of a high point. Something you look back at a point in your career that was maybe a turning point, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that was the interesting thing too. As I was about to graduate from OU, I took the LSAT, was planning on going to law school, and excuse me, get some water.
Yeah.
And had told my family that I just want to do this police thing, for about 5 years, get it out of my system, and then I go back to law school. And I remember my mom telling me, if you don't go to law school now, you'll never go. I was like, oh, what do you know? I'll go back to law school, and haven't been to law school yet, and still doing police work. But it's interesting how your plans and what you're going to do. And I think if I had stayed at Chickasha, if I wouldn't have been able to get the opportunity in Oklahoma City, I probably would have, gone back to law school. Because I didn't want to leave the state. Oklahoma City was it for me. It was where I wanted to work. And so if that hadn't worked out, I probably wouldn't be where I am today for sure.
There was previous guest on the podcast, Colonel Stan Evans, who's Oklahoma Hall of Famer. He went to law school at age 53. And graduated 57, so there's still time.
There is time. Yes,
he's I think he's the dean or assistant dean at OU Law Net right now, and
that's awesome.
Every time I meet him, it's just like he's in his 70s now, and he's just like, I should do more with my life, right?
That's what keeps you young. That's true.
I think the day after he graduated, the dean made him assistant dean. So awesome. But there's still time. So never say never, right?
That's right.
You start with Oklahoma City, kind of 89, 90, and you just kind of, this is my career now. You kind of see it, and you get obviously more formal training. Like I said, you didn't really get much training at Chickasha, but then you really get trained up, and you have your weapons and everything else, and I guess it's not just how do you shoot a gun straight? It's fitness and negotiating tactics, and there's so much to look at policing, de-escalation, or whatever it is, rather than just hey, I'm a police officer, I drive a car and I stop bad guys,
Yeah, and it was really it was eye-opening, number one, but it was really interesting. As I'm getting this training, it made me more appreciative because, having started the way I did in Chickasha and just getting thrown out in the car. Again, you're 21 years old and, it's like no big deal. You're invincible and all that. But as I started learning stuff in the academy and they're teaching us things about safety and what to look for, I'm thinking, holy cow, I knew none of this. Right. And I was thinking about situations I had been in where I know the officer I was riding with was cueing on these things and paying attention, but I had no clue. I was very thankful. And then also too, I was thankful for the position, but also I was amazed at how much equipment they bought us, because most other agencies at that time didn't do that, but they pretty much gave us everything we needed to do our job. And that was something to me I think it made me more appreciative of that, just having come from somewhere where I didn't have those opportunities.
Yeah. So when like you said, you decided, hey, I'm going to do this for 5 years and then I'm going to go to law school, and obviously that you're still being a police officer and ended up going into a career. Did anything change in those first 5 years that you're like, hey, this is a career for me now? Obviously you didn't go to law school. So was there a moment that kind of said, this is my calling, this is where I need to be, I don't need to get a law degree?
It's interesting with police work. I hear people say all the time that, the first year, a little over a year of an officer's career it's all training. Yeah. It's the academy, it's FTO, then you're on probation. And it's, the saying is you really don't get your investment out of that officer until somewhere around that 5-year mark. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but I know that now. It takes about that much before the officers are really capable and doing everything on their own. And for me, what I noticed, it was about year 3. I had been assigned at the time. I was riding, at that time it was a district called Adam 6, and it was just right over, just a little bit west of here, in the near northwest part of downtown. At that time, it's amazing now, it's a beautiful area, they're developing it, nice homes, all of that. But at that time, it was a pretty rough area. And I just remember, like one night, it just kind of dawned on me that things were just happening right in front of me, and I was, catching bad guys doing crazy things, stolen cars, selling drugs, weapons, all of those things. And I remember telling my supervisor, I said, man, it's really weird. These people are doing stuff right in front of me. He goes, it's not them, it's you. He said, you now have learned enough. You know where to be. You know where you're supposed to be to intercept criminal behavior and take these people off the streets. So it's not them that are doing things in front of you. You're in the position to make that happen. And I remember thinking, that's really cool. I mean, this is great. And I would go home at night feeling very rewarded at what I was doing. And, just that feeling of helping people, not just with that, but things like you go into a home and there's little kids in there and they're by themselves and they don't have food, and you could do something like maybe buy some food or get them out of a bad situation. I remember that was really cool to me too, just that you just went home at the end of the night and it never was the same. Every night was different. But probably the biggest thing for me that steered me for good, where I knew this is where I was supposed to be, was the bombing. I had about 5 years on the street then, but I had been on about 6 years when that happened. Not quite 6 years, but getting close to that when that happened, and going down and responding to that. I think it really changed things, because that also too, there wasn't a person in this city that wouldn't stop you and thank you. And I mean, even though, I don't feel like I had very much to do with it, but I think all of us kind of felt that way in some sense. But it just made me realize that there's not another job out there that's going to make me feel as good as this.
Right. Yeah. It goes a long way. Kind of probably goes back to that experience shadowing that detective, right? And being successful and solving that and being a part of that, or just witnessing it. And then, you're on your own or you're out on the road and, you're being successful. It's not just punching a clock and getting a paycheck every day and driving around and having a presence. It's making a difference, right? And that's kind of, like you said, you get that fulfillment in it. And once you get that fulfillment and you see you making a change, especially if it's kids or around families and women and children, that it goes a long way, right? Like that's kind of, and it's not an ego thing. It's just, I am making a difference here. Right?
Yes.
I want to get up in the morning and get to work and make a difference again. And I'm sure there's been tough times where you haven't felt like that. A couple of years ago when all the riots going on and the stuff you mentioned, social media and stuff happening around the state, and people are seeing law enforcement as bad things, and all the other stuff has gone to social media, and it just takes one person to probably during that time to roll the window down and just say, I appreciate you guys, right?
Absolutely. Very little thing too. When you think about the salary you make and those other things, those feelings of making a difference are even more important, because there's not many jobs that you can look back and say that and you can go. Now, again, I had nights too where I came home and was like, I wish I don't want to ever do that again or experience that again. You see something that is just horrible, but also too during those times, and people would ask me, a lot, that were outside law enforcement. They go, how do you deal with all the negative stuff you see? And I said, well, what happens is I end up feeling more blessed. I would come home thinking that I've never had to experience something like that, or no one in my family has had to experience something like that. And so, that's how you kind of get through those times too.
Yeah, and I'm sure in your time, since 89, 90, getting involved up to now, the kind of services that are available around mental health and just talking about it in groups are a lot more than you probably had in the start, right? You've got more people there and there's less stigma around that as well, right? So, probably earlier on in your career, and most guys I think suffer from this, you're young, nothing, I'm never going to talk about it, I don't need it. But you really need to talk about it. If you've seen something, some of the things you guys have seen, and we don't have to talk about it on the podcast because I think people listening would wince because it's horrific, the things that you see. Sadly, the stuff that you got to go through. But I'm interested to hear how it has evolved over time with mental health and the stuff that's available to you guys.
So I remember very early on that we had a chaplain for the police department, and I remember him being around us a lot and just talking to us and things. I never looked at it, and I don't think it was anything developed at that point as mental health, but it's more like just checking on us, seeing how we're doing, praying for us, those kind of things. But I remember after the bombing, they made all of us, we had to attend and it was group sessions. It wasn't one-on-one. But I don't remember, but I want to say maybe there was 10, 20 of us in a room with a counselor, and they just had us go around the room and talk about, what we'd seen, what we thought about, what we experienced about the bombing. And I remember being real resistant to that. I did not want to and I didn't open up hardly at all in a group like that setting, because I didn't want anybody to think I was bothered by any of that. And I bet you most of the people in the room did that same thing. But that was the first time that we had any of that, and I remember being mad because I was made to go to it. And also too, there was that, for lack of a better term, like the bravado of it. I don't need that. Why are they making me go to that? And so, fast forward now, when I first became chief, we had evolved over the years, and we had a program for officer wellness, but it was one person. One person and a chaplain, and then there was a group of volunteers with it too. And I remember sitting down with that individual when I first became chief, and he was telling me about all the things he was doing. I was like, I don't know how you're doing this, and there's no way you're keeping up with what our needs are. And so I remember I met with my command staff, and I said, we've got to make a change here to what we're doing, but I do not have the knowledge to do it. I'm not a counselor. I'm not trained in that. So one of my deputy chiefs at the time had I can't remember how he had met them, but it was through some training or something he had done. He met a guy that was a former chief in Aurora, Colorado, and his wife was a counselor. I don't remember what her exact title was, if she was a psychologist or what, but they formed a company after he retired, and it was called, Code 4 Counseling. We contracted with them as a consultant, and they came in and really got us to where we are today. We have a full-time wellness staff. It's 4 people. I have an LPC on staff, and I've got a host of volunteers. We just hired a chaplain, and that was another thing too. Our chaplaincy program, excuse me, our chaplaincy program had been a sworn police officer, and in some ways that's good, but I wanted someone that was, trained in the ministry and had come up with that. And so we recently hired a chaplain to do that. And then not only that, it was very interesting. You talk about the differences now in people wanting that help. We have, it's one of those things, if you build it, they will come. Yeah. We have a lot that come for help now, and the stigma, it still may be there a little bit, but it's going away, especially with the younger generation. They're a lot more open about this. It's normal for them. They're not, as closed off. But that LPC, when he first started, I thought it's going to take him a year before these cops are going to accept him. And nope, within about the first week, people were coming in. He's got almost more than he can do right now. So it's really changed. It's evolved. I love seeing it. I love seeing our officers willing to go and get help. We have, if an officer is involved in a critical incident, whether it's an officer-involved shooting, in custody death, or they've just seen something that's really bad, we have processes for them to go through to get help. They can get paid wellness leave, so they don't have to use their own time to do that. I mean, again, it's much more robust than it ever was.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? And you're right. Kind of early on, everyone's kind of, it's seen as a stigma. It's seen as, I'm showing weakness if I go do this, and some people might look at it as if I go do this, I'm risking my job, right?
Yes.
You might get like, oh, people can't trust me. I'm not reliable. I've got mental health issues. They might fire me or whatever it is, right? And I think now, like you said, I'm glad that it's, it's such a critical part because, and I also think, obviously the society has evolved so much in 30 years, since the 90s, and with social media and videos and more pressure just on you guys in general, like even if just pulling someone over for a busted taillight, like there's so much stuff that is more, kind of around that rather than if it was 30 years ago. It's just, you guys do a lot of stuff. You don't get paid enough for it. I probably don't get enough appreciation for it, but I'm glad that that is there because, it's obviously worth its weight in gold, and it's kind of the time that the resources and the money that's been put into it is clearly worth everything that you get out of it. And no doubt there's been people in it who have probably prolonged their career because of that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is Code 4 like badge down, I'm out? Is that kind of where it's named after?
Just means everything's okay.
Oh, okay.
If you say Code 4, everything's good.
What's the opposite then? Because there is a code for like, hey, I'm done here. Like, right, isn't that?
Are you talking about like going out of service, 10-7? We say that when we're going out of service.
I had a friend of mine who was kind of in the police force, and he said, if you see something horrific and you're just like, it's code whatever, I'm like, badge down, guns down, I'm never doing this ever again. I don't know what that was. Most people call that code brown, but in the police system, it's probably something different.
Well, and I think it could be similar to what, you know, because when we say 10-7, we're out of service. Or,
that's
you know, when we're retired and do our final call, we say we're 10-7.
Okay.
Maybe that's the same thing.
Because I was talking to him, and he's not a police officer, but he has a friend, one of his best friends is, and they share stories, and he said that one of his colleagues had seen something that was so bad that night he's like, never doing this again. I need a new job, which happens, sadly.
It does. And that's why, too, that wellness team is so important. We have, it's an email that goes out across the entire department. It's called a significant incident. And so there's certain criteria that meet that. And so supervisors will do those significant incidents. And so say that the night before, officers had to respond to a child death, and they did CPR on the child, were unable to save him, something like that. Then our wellness team, they monitor that. And when they see something like that, they're going to go out to that division and that lineup the next night, make sure everybody's doing okay. And it's just to, kind of what we've learned is over the years in law enforcement, people would look at, if you're involved in something real traumatic, like an officer-involved shooting, or you respond to some large incident, the tornadoes, for example, you see a lot of things out of that too, people hurt or killed. Something real big like that, you think, oh my gosh, that's really bad. We got to get those officers some help. What we've learned now over probably about the last 10 years or so is that the cumulative trauma can sometimes be worse. Yeah. So, for example, you have an officer who maybe has never been involved in a shooting, but over 10, 15 years, they've seen more trauma, triple what the average person sees in a lifetime. Yeah. And that's what we try to address as well. We even recently implemented a program where alcohol is a big problem for cops. They use that to deal with a lot of the stresses, and sometimes sleeping, things like that. They think, well, if I drink, I can go to sleep, and so we start to see that and addictions to alcohol. And in the past, what you'd see is that start to impact their attendance at work. So they're abusing their leave, taking off, and they run out of leave, and they're to a point, they're at the bottom. They're drinking too much to probably function, but they won't go get help because most of that help's going to be long term, 30 to 60 days. So we recently instituted a program where if an officer will come to us before they get in trouble, like before they get a DUI or something like that, and say, I need help, we will do that. And even if they're out of leave, we'll put them on paid leave. And we've seen some really big success, and it's interesting because when we first started that program, I had quite a few officers take advantage of that, and it concerned me. So I called another chief from another major city because I knew he had a program similar to that. And I go, hey, I've had this many guys, this many officers come to me and say, I need help, and we've got it to him. He goes, man, that's great. I go, no, I'm a little concerned. He goes, well, you shouldn't be. He said that means they're taking advantage of it and they're getting help before they get in trouble. So I had to kind of sit back and take that perspective of, it's good because I probably would have lost that many officers. Right. Something would have happened and they would have lost their job. Yeah. And so anyway, it's just interesting to me how that program has come, all of wellness in general, but now that we have folks that are willing to come and say, hey, if you'd have done that when I first started, a matter of fact, I had an officer on my shift who was I think he was out of 2 academies before me that had a drinking problem, and they just fired him. I mean, he was gone. They didn't try to do anything to help him or anything like that. So it's good to see where we've come now.
Yeah, definitely. Moving, is that mine?
It's mine.
Moving kind of things, along and just, you mentioned the bombing and having that having such an impact on your career. And obviously a few weeks ago, we had the Oklahoma City Marathon. I love the marathon. It's just, every time I get to invite someone to the city and have them do it and just ask for their reaction, right? Even if they just do the 5K, the half marathon, whatever it is, just being there to cheer, just hearing if they've ran marathons in the past, they come to Oklahoma City, they get, they're crossing the finish line in tears, right? Yeah. And it's not, and they have no they have no relation to, Oklahoma City or just the events of that day, but just the overwhelmingness and the support for that event. and it's obviously a huge operation for your side.
Oh yeah.
So everyone knows like the marathon side of things, but people don't know about your side of it. You're closing down streets at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and so what is that like being in your role as a chief of Oklahoma City Police and having that event? Planning all the way up to it. With the marathon, with Carrie and the whole, board there, and getting the event planned, and just the scale of this event that means so much to Oklahoma City. What's that like being in your role during that event?
It really is a labor of love, and if you ask my staff that's directly involved in that, I'm sure they'll tell you there's a lot of headaches with it, and they do, and I talk to them regularly as they're planning, but it is a year-long planning, and it takes a lot of police officers to make that happen, and we have to bring people in on their days off and other things. For the most part, though, even officers that are new, they volunteer for that. And when I say volunteer, they're getting paid, don't get me wrong, but they volunteer for that assignment, and they just love it because the people are so supportive when they run past you. You're encouraging them for running, but they're encouraging and thanking you. And there's just, when I go out there and I roam around the course and listen to the radio and just make sure everything's going good, I don't run into any officer that's grumpy or anything like that. They're very happy to be there and do it. And I remember the first time they ran that marathon, me and a group of officers, we got a relay team together and ran it, and we did that for several years. And I just remember like seeing the names of someone who had died as a result of that act, and seeing those names on those bibs, and of course I recognize those names, but just thinking what an honor, how cool is that these people, and there are a lot of people, just average everyday people, that probably, it took everything they have to train and run that marathon, but they'll do it no matter what the pain and finish it. It's a really neat event, and interesting story. We went out, and this year I was doing, just running the course. I mean, driving around and doing what I normally do, and just kind of talking to officers and other things out there. And I stopped at this one point, and there was a young man that was working there. It wasn't an officer, and it was one of the, he probably was a volunteer, but anyway, I was talking to him, and he said, "How long do you have to be out here?" I said, "Oh, I get to be out here. I don't have to be out here." And I think that's the way most of the officers feel, and it's just a really neat experience. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people were running past me and saying, "Thank you for all you do," and appreciate you. And of course, they're doing it to everybody, all the officers on that course. So it's a real neat experience. I'm so glad that that's something that the memorial, the foundation, that the group that runs that they came up with that idea, and they do it, and it takes a lot of work on their part every year too, and so I'm grateful that they do it.
Yeah, it's you have to be, it's, if people listening haven't been involved in it, like, you can be involved in it. And this year, for the first time this year, I had kind of a cheer section. We had like a This Is Oklahoma branded cheer section out here by the Hall of Fame, and it's the first time I've ever done that. My wife ran the full. I did the full last year, and running is totally different, right? Like you're in the pain cave.
Yeah.
Like it's, but you're right. Like people are going through that, because, to remember, right? Run to remember is the kind of tagline. And, they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about, I'm doing this for a reason, whether it's raising money, or just running. But it was such a great experience being on the route all day, just kind of, just feeling the energy. And I was very surprised. We were out there, we started at 6:30, got set up, and I was surprised that it only took us 45 minutes to an hour before we saw the first runner. Like, they are fast.
Oh, yeah.
So
they're in a
fast.
full-on sprint. Those ones in the front, I watched them, I'm like, there's no way I could barely keep that up to the end of the driveway.
Yeah,
it's amazing. You're right. It's fun to watch. It really is.
Yeah, and kind of to that point as well, like it's not just the police department that you work with, EMTs, with fire. What's that like, kind of just, because one of the things I think people look at, law enforcement in America, in Oklahoma, and just in general, is there's so many different departments and agencies, right? And sometimes, maybe you see in a movie or you see on a TV show, whatever it is, like, obviously on TV shows and movies it's different, but like it seems like you guys work together a lot easier than they portray it in movies, right? Some of the police stuff you see in movies is like the FBI comes in and they're taking over or whatever. You don't, it's like that internal battle. But interested kind of what it's like as a chief of police for Oklahoma City when, you do have a big case or you do have a big incident happen and DEA might come in, especially with the marijuana stuff we have in Oklahoma, right? You're dealing with a lot of that. And what's that like, with bigger agencies? And have you ever thought that, that's something that you maybe want to do later in life now that you're, especially if you would be assigned in Oklahoma and not travel around the country? What's that like?
Well, first of all, I always say I'm employed by the greatest department in the country in the greatest city, and I tell this to people all the time. When I leave this job, I'm not going to take another one. In law enforcement, I'd be disappointed because I just think Oklahoma City is so great and our people are so supportive. It's just a great community, great place to work. But it is interesting. It's nothing like what you see on TV. And I know I talk to chiefs from some other major cities, and they do have some of those issues. Yeah. But we are very blessed here. That's one of the things when I first became chief that me and all of my staff, very much so. I said we have to focus on our relationships. We're authorized at 1,235. We haven't been at that since I've been chief. Even before anything that happened in 2020 and we saw more retirements and less people applying, we haven't been fully staffed in a long time. So you think about, we cover 621 square miles. This city is growing. Used to that 621 square miles, there's a lot of it that there just wasn't anybody there, and that's not hardly the case anymore. And so I say all the time that we need our federal partners. We need our other metro agencies that we work around. Yeah. And so we meet regularly. We have what's called a Metro Chiefs meeting, but in that Metro Chiefs meeting, we have representatives from the FBI, from the ATF, all of the federal agencies, and we have officers that are what are called task force officers, TFOs, that have federal credentials. So if we start working a case and it expands beyond that, they have jurisdiction to work those. And so Oklahoma City Police Department could not do what it does without those partners. And then you talk about, fire, IMSA. I can't tell you how many times, as a patrol officer that I was on a call by myself and fire department shows up and ended up having to help me, get out of a fight or take somebody into custody or just be there just for that help and support. And so also too, if any of us get hurt, we know those EMTs that are with fire or IMSA are going to be there helping us. And so it really is a great relationship. And of course, police and firefighters, we rib each other all the time.
Oh, yeah.
We have to. Yeah. Anytime me and Chief Kelly are at an event, if I'm speaking, I take a shot. If he's speaking, he takes a shot. But it's all in good fun. We're good friends. And I think if any agency, law enforcement agency or anything, is arrogant enough to believe they can handle everything going on in their city by themselves, they're just that. It's arrogant. Yeah,
you have to have that.
You have to have those partnerships.
And the fire department usually first guys to show up, right?
Oh yeah.
Generally, the first guys for any 911 call or whatever it is. Like fire is always first to go. Yeah, I joke. A friend of mine who he's on the Second Century Board here at Oklahoma Hall of Fame. He was a lawyer. He was a law student. Did corporate law for a long time, and now he's works for Oklahoma City Fire. He just finished school. He started. His first day was the day of the marathon. Wow. I joke with him like when's your calendar coming out? What month are you in the calendar? And how many cats have you rescued today? Kind of thing. But it is amazing when you kind of hear those those in-house stories of just the scale of things you guys do. And obviously we had massive grass fires about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago.
And even that now, we've got helicopters, and we're the only agency in this area besides OHP that has the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, which has helicopters and aircraft. And so we recently, I think it's been about a year or two now that we started first looking at that, but we recently have started utilizing our helicopter to help the fire department on those wildland fires. And we actually have a fire officer in our aircraft that's our basically our crew chief on that and helping us with that. And it's been a wonderful partnership. I think it's good for the city. We're in the process of getting a third aircraft so that we can make sure we're available to do those. And so it's just a great partnership. And again, I couldn't do anything without. And that's the thing too. When you even look at your local and state partners, the people that commit crimes in Oklahoma City, they're committing them in Tulsa, they're committing them in Bethany, War Acres. So, if you don't work together and think crime stops at your city limits, I mean, you're not going to be successful.
It's everywhere. That's why you guys have a job.
Job security,
Sadly, it is everywhere. And whether it's, like somebody stealing something from a store or just, just harassment or abuse or whatever it is, like you guys are there to do everything. And, naturally people think of shooting, right? That's like the first thing that people think of, and buzzwords and just what's in the media. And, the media is fueled by negativity. That's what fuels eyeballs and shares and social media, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, there is so much more that you guys do, not just arresting people and car chases. It's we could sit here for 10 hours and talk about the things that you guys do.
Oh, yeah. And the discussion all across the country is, why are we sending police officers to do this and that? And we need to get them out of that business. And we don't disagree. I mean, it's gotten to where people call 911 for everything.
Yeah.
I had a member of the community one time that I was sitting down with, and he said it very well. He said, why are we calling the police for things my grandmother used to handle?
Yeah.
And it's true. So, you won't get any argument out of us when you look at alternative responses and things like that. I mean, we need to be there. We need to be a part of society to keep people safe. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that we do that we shouldn't be.
Right. Does the kind of going through this process and being in law enforcement 30 plus years now, with Oklahoma City, does the little boy in you ever think that I want to be a highway patrolman and chase bad guys in cars, right? And do police chases?
It's interesting. I never really thought about that, but when I was a kid, in southern Oklahoma, where I grew up, troopers were kind of it, they were like, that was really cool when you saw a trooper. Yeah. And I remember one of my first jobs I had was I was a busboy at a restaurant in Ardmore, and there was troopers would always come in there, because especially late, that was a 24-hour restaurant, and I just remember talking to them and talking about stuff they did, and of course I loved southern Oklahoma, so there was a little bit of me that I thought that might be what I would want to do and stay in that part of the state. Yeah. But I also thought, in looking at that and listening to what they said, that it was just more diverse being a city police officer, the things that you deal with and the magnitude of things and stuff like that. So there probably was a little bit of me at one point that thought, man, that'd be really cool. But as I got older and I really learned more about law enforcement, for me, I just felt like a large municipality was the place to be.
Yeah. I mean, they do look cool, right? It seems that the only exercise they do in the gym is biceps, because they've all got massive arms, and they're all kind of big guys, and it's I mean it's kind of it looks like a glamorous job, right? It's probably not, but what you see on media and social media is these guys are doing car chases and doing drug busts and whatever it is, and I know it takes a lot more. The training for OHP is quite more significant to Oklahoma City Police, right? It's like it's not.
No, we all have the same guidelines with CLEAT. We actually exceed those guidelines. Our academy is 27, 28 weeks now. I think OHP, they have a very lengthy academy too. Sure. I would say us, Tulsa, any agency that runs their own academy is getting a lot of training before they go out. The thing is, I think for those troopers, a lot of times they are by themselves, and I think that's a big thing to think about too. You get out in some of these rural areas, and I think I have a lot of respect for them, because they still have to do the job, but they call for backup. It's not there. It's the thing about here in Oklahoma City. You call for backup, it's here pretty quick. So I think from that standpoint, it's a little bit tougher job. And I can tell you too, when I was working in Chickasha, I was working graveyard shift. We had some nights we had 2, maybe 3 officers working the entire city, and those troopers were our backup too there. So it's interesting, I think, depending on where you are, kind of what's needed in the community, and I think everybody kind of steps up with that role too. And we have very good relationships with the Highway Patrol. We do a lot of things together, our tactical units and those kind of things. So I mean, I think we're all we're all in it together, and really any department now, it's so much different when I jumped in a car that one night without training all those years ago. It's very different now. I mean, training is a really big component of every law enforcement agency.
Finishing up, 2 questions. First one, what is the stuff like that, just stuff that you were just unaware of getting into it, maybe misconceptions or things that just, you look back and you're like, oh, I was just kind of blind to that, but now it's so clear to me. Is there anything that stands out like that from the position that you're in? Is it, I guess you're in the media a lot, right, since being the chief. Is there anything that comes from being in the media that you probably didn't think of that now you're fully aware of?
So you're talking about as chief?
Yeah.
When you talk about media, I have gained a lot more respect for the media. Now sometimes, it's easy to get frustrated with them.
Sure.
When they do a story and those kind of things. But I don't know that there's any or very many jobs out there where people are, it's kind of like law enforcement. They're very dedicated to what they do, but they work a ton of hours. The pay for a lot of them isn't that great, but they still do it. And I've met and talked to a lot of reporters, and I just gain a lot of respect. And a lot of times you see somebody on TV, and I think it's a lot like our job, where that you make a judgment based off, something they say or whatever, something real silly that you're like, I don't like that person. And then you realize that you're doing the same things that you get frustrated about as a police officer, especially as a police chief. And, and you realize too, those really are good people. And I think the relationship that I try to have with the media is, it's okay to question us, critique us, any of that. I don't mind, but I just don't. I think there's a line there where you try to dramatize or you're trying to get that aha or gotcha. And I'm just very honest of, you ask me a question, I'm going to answer it unless it's something by law I can't answer. But at some point, when that works its way out, I'll give you your answer. Yeah. And I think that helps, is just being transparent and open. But at the same time, I think that's the biggest thing for me, is I've gained a very much a respect for those in the media for what they do.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's so easy to just kind of fire off a tweet about, a color of someone's power tie. Think of David Payne, it's storm season, right? What he said tonight, if there's a storm, and it's so easy to do because we all do it. But it's different when you're that person, right? And people, and you're reading comments, which is the worst thing to do, because if you meet those people in person, they're probably going to shake your hand and say thank you. They're not going to fire off a tweet or a comment being hateful. It's easier when they're sat in their own room on their phone, right? It's sad.
Yeah, and they attack you more at a personal level. And I've noticed that too as chief. I mean, there's people in this community that are constantly negative against me. I've never had a conversation with. They've never sat down with me. And I find that interesting too. They talk like they know you and you're this evil person. But they do that a lot to the folks in the media too. I don't know, what the answer is, other than we all have to work together, and we have to respect that. And again, I can't get mad or frustrated if they ask me a question I don't like, because especially if we made a mistake or did something we shouldn't have, I need to stand up and take accountability for that. But I'll also stand up and defend our folks when they're right too. And I think most of them understand that, and it's been interesting, because I'm not going to tell you I don't get frustrated sometimes, but at the same time I just have such a better understanding of it.
Right. Yeah. Last question, kind of a fun one. What are the best perks about being chief of police? Do you get, are you able to kind of like flick on the blues and get through traffic anywhere you want to go? Do you get free food anywhere? Like, you get a key to the city, like in The Simpsons? I mean, what are the perks that just kind of, just lighthearted stuff that you can kind of joke about?
It's funny you say that, because I get asked that a lot, and I tell people and they don't believe me. There really are none. I mean, it's not like I even have joked around before, and I thought, at least I ought to be able to play golf free at a city golf course or something. But no, I mean, none of that. And I'll be honest too, I don't like that. I always feel guilty. I try not to eat out too much, because if I do, people want to buy my lunch and stuff, and I always feel guilty about that. I would say the perks of it are, for me, it's just that I get to represent the city a lot. And I had someone at Major Cities recently. We were at a Major Cities meeting, and they were talking about the influence that we have as police chiefs. And I never really thought about it, but they said, you think about a lot of they named off a lot of different government officials. They said, they can say something and it probably draws some attention, but if you say something, they said people listen to it and they really gravitate towards that. And I have kind of noticed that, which means you got to be careful what you say too. But at the same time, as a representative of the city, I feel like that's pretty good. And there's a lot of places I go where you see somebody you wish you hadn't seen. I don't like being recognized, but now it's very hard not to. But for the most part, when I am recognized, people are coming up and saying very positive things. And so I think, from a perk standpoint for me, that's pretty good. But I really, like people think I get free tickets to the Thunder game or something. I don't, none of that. And I'd feel guilty if I did get any of that, because that's just it's not my nature. Most police officers we don't want to, get anything for free. But it's funny. You're not the only one that asks that. I get asked that all the time.
I figured that would be kind of a fun question. Because it's I was at there was a concert last night at the Jones Assembly, and I was there, and the guy that I was with was very good friends with two of the police officers that were there. Mm-hmm. And we were walking out, and his buddy came over, and I'm like, you got the best gig ever. You get a free show to see this guy rock out at the Jones, and then as we're leaving, he's directing traffic. I'm like, I get to go home right now. You probably got another 5 hours of your shift tonight. So, I guess it comes, there's good things and bad things that happen.
Yeah.
But,
and I know when I was a young officer, and we had concerts coming here, I'd do everything I could to try to work those.
Yeah.
And even though you're working and you got to be on your feet, and of course, if something happens, you got to deal with it. But I remember getting to listen to the Eagles and Aerosmith and stuff like that. And you couldn't just sit there and like enjoy the concert. You had to pay what was going on, but you were still there. You got to hear the music and that kind of stuff. So it can be pretty cool. But again, you're working, and like you said, everybody goes home and you're still there.
That's kind of what he said. Is he was like, look, I'm working, but also like I got to meet the artists. Like we went, we were backstage, got to see everybody, and you kind of get to, I guess, geek out a little bit if it's someone like the Eagles that you love, or someone coming through town, and you're meeting people that you might not get the opportunity to meet up close, without spending a lot of money to get a VIP pass, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's and they appreciate you because they know you're there to help safety and everyone have a good time and all the other things. But I want to thank you so much for taking an hour of your day to come out, share some stories. It's been a pleasure to give you the opportunity to share stories. It means a lot to come on the podcast. And if there is anyone out there that is listening, that is interested in joining the Oklahoma City Police Force, then we'll put a link in the description. They can go to that and fill out whatever it is they need to do. But thanks so much for your time.
And I appreciate that. People ask all the time, what's the biggest issue we're dealing with? And it's not just us, it's all around the country. We're 215 officers down, and we need good folks. And so, we're recruiting heavily right now. So, and it's my pleasure to be here. This has been kind of fun to reminisce and think about how things started and where I am today, because I definitely did not think I would be chief of the Oklahoma City Police Department one day. Not at all. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. For people listening, I'll, like I said, post the link in the description, and we'll catch you next episode. Cheers. Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at OklahomaHOF. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. This episode is presented by the Choctaw Nation. The Choctaw people have a rich history and a bright future. At the Choctaw Cultural Center, you can take part in a story 14,000 years in the making. Stroll through our immersive exhibits portraying Choctaw life from the moment our ancestors emerged from the Nani Weha in Mississippian homelands to the Trail of Tears, where we lost so many loved ones, and finally to the modern-day tribe making a positive impact on local communities throughout southeastern Oklahoma. Try your hand at our social dancing and stickball and learn more about our vibrant culture through demonstrations, workshops, and classes. The kids will have a blast in our Luxie Activity Center. The Choctaw Cultural Center is more than a museum. It's a living, breathing experience. Visit choctawculturalcenter.com to plan your visit.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.